U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris laid out her argument against Donald Trump at the first rally of her presidential campaign on Tuesday, while a new poll showed her with a slight lead over her Republican rival. Harris took aim at Trump's vulnerabilities, comparing her background as a former prosecutor to his record as a convicted felon.
In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
The rally saw a crowd of thousands in Milwaukee, the largest city in the battleground state of Wisconsin, which looks to be crucial in deciding November's election outcome.
And Wisconsin, this campaign is also about two different visions for our nation. Do we want to live in a country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law? Or a country of chaos, fear, and hate?
The crowd's energy was an encouraging sign for Democrats hopeful that Harris can revive what had been a flagging campaign under President Joe Biden. A new Reuters Ipsos poll conducted early this week after Biden dropped out of the race Sunday showed Harris taking a marginal lead over Trump 44 to 42% among registered voters. Compare that to another Reuters Ipsos poll last week that had Biden trailing by 2 points. While both were within a 3-point margin of error, the results could signal movement, if limited, in Democrats' direction. Still, Trump expressed confidence in his ability to defeat Harris in a conference call with reporters on Tuesday. Trump offered to debate Harris multiple times, saying, quote, "I want to debate her, and she'll be no different because they have the same policies." Harris has swiftly consolidated her party support after Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed her as his replacement over the weekend. Her campaign said that by Monday night she had secured support from the majority of delegates who at next month's party convention will determine the nominee, effectively wrapping up the nomination, and that it had raised $100 million since Sunday. Harris also gained 2 more big-name party backers on Tuesday in Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, the party leaders in the Senate and House. Meanwhile, Biden returned to Washington after several days isolating at his home in Delaware with COVID-19. His doctor said Biden tested negative and no longer has symptoms. Biden said on X that he would address the nation from the Oval Office Wednesday night, explaining his decision to end his campaign.
With enough Democratic delegates to be the party's nominee for president, Kamala Harris is on a glide path to formally accept the nomination at the Democratic National Convention. All eyes are now on Chicago, where the nominating event begins August 19th.
It looks to me actually like the process is already over.
And political science professor John Mark Hansen of the University of Chicago said it is highly unlikely anyone but Harris will be the nominee.
She's already locked it up because everybody who might have been a formidable challenger to her has now endorsed her. So it's hard to see that there's anyone who would really contest it, and hard to see that anyone would really want to wade into it and just create all kinds of problems for the party.
A party brawl would be disaster for the Democrats.
History professor Alan Lichtman of American University says not unifying behind a single candidate would likely result in a loss in November.
That would create a situation where there's an open seat, since Biden is not running, and an internal party fight. Under those conditions, since 1900, the White House party has never, I repeat, never been reelected. In effect, that would recreate exactly the same conditions under which Donald Trump was elected in the first place.
The timing is very tight.
Dr. Mina Bose, the executive dean for public policy at Hofstra University, says there simply isn't enough time for Democrats to entertain another option.
Vice President Harris, I think, has, having served in office, having run a presidential campaign before, is well positioned to pivot and to mount in this limited time. It's really probably the Democrat with the only Democrat with the visibility to mount a strong campaign in this time, less than 4 months before Election Day.
The ball is rolling.
Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason says delegates could still technically shift their support to another candidate, but nobody else is stepping up.
that doesn't mean she wouldn't probably welcome a challenger. I think that they are sensitive to looking like it's in a process of anointing rather than a process of earning people's support. And she used the term earn in her statement after President Biden stepped aside.
It is my intention to go out and earn this nomination.
There aren't challengers coming forward to go against Kamala Harris, in part because they just want to have a name, have somebody at the top. She's the natural successor to Joe Biden, and get moving and start working on that race against Donald Trump.
Palestinian factions have agreed to end divisions and form an interim unity government during talks in China that ended on Tuesday. That's according to China's foreign ministry.
China appreciates the efforts made by various parties for reconciliation and warmly congratulates the signing of the Beijing Declaration.
The statement said the Beijing Declaration was signed by 14 factions, including rivals Hamas and Fatah, during a closing ceremony which ended reconciliation dialogue held in the capital from July the 21st to the 23rd. Senior Hamas official Musa Abu Marzouk.
We're signing an agreement for national unity to say that the way to continue this path is our national unity, and that's why we're adhering to our national unity. We call for it, and we won't let anything affect this national unity. Our dear brothers and friends, this is a historical moment. We ask God to help us achieve what we signed on.
But will this deal survive on the ground? Previous efforts by countries to reconcile Hamas and Fatah have failed to end 17 years of power-sharing conflict that have weakened Palestinian political aspirations. The meeting was held amid attempts by international mediators to reach a ceasefire deal for Gaza. One of the sticking points has been the day-after plan, how the Hamas-run enclave will be governed once the conflict between Israel and Palestinian militants ends. Currently, Hamas runs Gaza and Fatah forms the backbone of the Palestinian Authority, which has limited control in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Israel has dismissed the deal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said his goal is to destroy the Iran-backed Hamas group, opposing its rule in a post-war Gaza administration. Details of the agreement did not set out a timeframe for forming a new government.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, a day before he's set to speak to a joint session of the U.S. Congress. But even abroad, he could not escape pressing challenges back home. Video and images released by his office showed him meeting with families of Israeli hostages believed held by Hamas in Gaza. He told family members that, quote, the conditions are ripening for a ceasefire that would bring some of the captives home. But senior Hamas official Sami Abu Zuhri told Reuters there was nothing new in Netanyahu's stance. He said, quote, Netanyahu is still stalling, and he is sending delegations only to calm the anger of Israeli captives' families. That anger was on full display in the days before Netanyahu left for Washington.
Mr. Netanyahu, this is not the time for a show trip.
Danielle Aloni was held captive in Gaza along with her 5-year-old daughter before they were freed in a November ceasefire. Adina Moshe is another former hostage.
I call on you, Prime Minister, don't go before you sign the deal. Save those you can. There are living hostages. There is no time.
Hamas gunmen killed 1,200 people and took more than 200 captive in an October 7th rampage through Israeli communities, according to Israeli tallies. In a week-long truce in November, more than 100 hostages were freed in return for 240 Palestinian prisoners. Hamas and other militants are still holding 120 captives, around a third of whom have been declared dead by Israeli authorities. Israel's devastating retaliatory air and ground operation has so far killed more than 39,000 people in 10 months of fighting, according to Palestinian health officials. Netanyahu's visit comes amid a renewed push by Israeli forces in Khan Yunis. Israel called on civilians to again evacuate the city. Those forced out include Ibtital al-Brahim, along with her family. She told Reuters they had to leave without food, water, or essentials. She said missiles were falling and she saw aircraft and tanks moving into her neighborhood. Months of efforts mediated by Egypt and Qatar to reach a new ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas gained momentum in recent weeks under a proposal outlined by U.S. President Joe Biden in May. An Israeli negotiation team was due on Thursday to resume talks that would include hostages being released in return for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli
Secret
jails.
Service Director Kimberly Cheadle has resigned after her agency came under intense scrutiny for failing to prevent an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. That's according to the White House on Tuesday.
It is my firm belief, Director Cheadle, that you should resign.
It comes after Cheadle faced bipartisan condemnation before the House of Representatives Oversight Committee on Monday, where she declined to answer questions from frustrated lawmakers about the security plan for the rally and how law enforcement responded to the suspicious behavior of the gunman.
I don't want to add to the director's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, but I will be joining the chairman in calling for the resignation of the director, just because I think that this relationship is irretrievable at this point.
President Joe Biden said in a statement that the independent review of July 13th would continue and that he would appoint a successor soon. The agency did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Representative James Comer, chair of the House Oversight Committee, said in a statement, "While Director Cheadle's resignation is a step toward accountability, we need a full review of how these security failures happened so that we can prevent them going forward." A would-be assassin wounded Trump during a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, July 13th, after firing shots from a nearby roof. The shooter was killed by police after he killed one person and injured two others in addition to Trump.
U.S. Senator Bob Menendez submitted his resignation on Tuesday in the aftermath of his conviction on corruption charges, effective August 20th, 2024. Menendez was facing pressure from fellow Democrats to give up the job after being found guilty on 16 criminal counts that included bribery, obstruction of justice, and wire fraud earlier in the month. The Senate on Tuesday entered his resignation letter into the record.
Without objection, the letter will be printed in the record and spread upon the journal.
The trial centered on what federal prosecutors called several overlapping bribery schemes, in which the senator and his wife accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, gold bars, and car and mortgage payments from 3 businessmen. In exchange, Menendez, a fixture in Washington for more than 3 decades, helped steer billions of dollars in American aid to Egypt and tried to influence the criminal prosecutions of 2 of the businessmen, prosecutors said. Menendez plans to appeal. His sentencing is set for October 29th, a week before the November 5th presidential election. Democratic New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy will appoint a replacement for Menendez. Until then, his resignation will temporarily reduce the Democratic majority in the Senate to 50 to 49.
Anti-government protests have been a common sight across Kenya in recent weeks. But these demonstrators, riding motorbikes through the capital Nairobi on Tuesday, are rallying in support of the government.
We will make sure that businesses must go back to normal in this town. We condemn the protests.
The pro-government protesters clashed with anti-government rivals on Tuesday morning before being dispersed by police who fired tear gas. One anti-government protester said they were being unfairly targeted.
The police are only targeting us, peaceful demonstrators, while hired goons, covered in masks on motorbikes with concealed number plates, are moving in plain sight as the police just watch. Who are they? And what kind of country is this?
Protests erupted in June against proposed tax hikes. They have since grown into a wider movement against President William Ruto's government. More than 50 people have been killed after marches that were initially peaceful turned violent, with police opening fire. Anti-government protesters are calling for Ruto to resign and for systemic changes to tackle corruption and poor governance. On Friday, Ruto reinstated several cabinet members who had been dismissed a week earlier. That was, he said, to form a new government that would respond to the protesters' grievances.